Let's welcome John here. John, you're going to sit right here. Before you sit, you just stand on the other side. Let me just go over here. So I put here one of the most respected college basketball analysts with stops at ESPN, Westwood One, and Sirius XM, Big Ten Network, Fox Sports. That was early in your career.
Yeah.
And then he played in the NCAA tournament at Penn State with his brother, who happens to also be the former men's basketball coach here at Rowan, who's now at Penn State, but also played 2 seasons at UCLA. Won 2 state championships at Pittman High School. Were those the highlight? Is that the highlight, Pittman High School?
Yeah, I peaked in high school. It's cool.
You peaked in high school?
Yeah.
So a really cool background, and we'll talk with John. So let's do it. Have a seat, John. Have a seat. Let me just get this here. There we go. So so you live how far from here? How many minutes?
Stone's throw, 2.5 minutes, except for the immortal students that just want to cross 322, right? Who's guilty of that? Like buried in their phone.
Everybody should be raising their hand.
Yeah, everybody. At least you guys have the crosswalks that light up to like alert us to slow down. Down at like places like Maryland, totally immortal students. It's almost like they want to get hit. So I would say it could have taken me 3 minutes. It took me about 4.
All right, so I will say now, in the 5+ years that I've been doing Pizza with the Pros, you are the closest guest that we've ever had that lives here to King Auditorium. So this is your second home right here.
That's like a mini victory.
Yes, it is. There it is. So, all right. So you were a terrific basketball player growing up. So just take me through a little bit of the early years, and then onto your Penn State career, and then we're going to get into your broadcasting career.
Look, I grew up in Pittman, New Jersey. Is anybody familiar with Pittman? Right? Okay, so you know where it is, like Broadway Theater and all that stuff, tiny little town. We were not known for sports in any way. And we grew up in Pittman. We played with our friends, right? We didn't have the social media. We didn't have a lot of the things that you have today. We didn't have open gym time, right? We had playgrounds. And in a way, it created this dynamic of community, like unity, like brotherhood. And it wasn't just the people like in my class. It was older kids. It was graduates who came back. We just played. We loved it, but we weren't very good. Somewhere along the line, my brother's 2 years older than me, we realized that we were pretty good at it. And I think this kind of molded us in a unique way. My brother Joe had the opportunity to go to a Bishop Eustace camp near Gloucester Catholic, Camden Catholic, wherever it was going to be, right? He was a good basketball player. And I remember the conversation with my father, and my father just challenged him a bit, and he says, Joe, do you think you're really that good? And he goes, yeah, I do think I'm pretty good. He's in 8th grade, going to be a freshman in high school. And my dad said, well, if you're really that good, you'll make Pittman good too. And Pittman had won 2 games in 2 years before he had gotten there. And I embellish a lot, but that's one, sadly, I am not embellishing. It was bad. And he came into a program and lit the place on fire. And there was something in that just made us want to be great where we were. Right. And for me, it wasn't just basketball. Like I was a better baseball player, pitcher than I was football player, better football player than I was basketball player. 10 concussions later, I'm playing basketball in college. I was probably a better athlete than I was basketball player. But what I was that like you couldn't take away, I was a killer, right? I was a competitor. And it's something today we're seeing with the money that's being thrown around in sports, it's lost a bit. And I think that's what separated us. I mean, you look at me, right? I'm not exactly imposing. I was a starting 2 guard in the Big Ten and Pac-12. Like, a lot of people laughed at that for a few minutes at least, right? But there was a swagger and an edge that came from a simple place, right? A simple place like Pittman. There was a competitiveness that came from having to prove yourself. And in so many ways, I still do it today in the broadcasting world. I mean, the amount of people that will come up to me legitimately, how did you get this job? I mean, how would you respond to that, right? Gives me a little bit of an edge, but it's no different than it was when I was a player. It makes me a little bit better at what I do. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know. That's my answer. I don't know, man. Like, I don't know how I'm here. Grace of God, whatever you want to say. Like, I'm really lucky to get to do what I do. I think the reason why I'm in the seat that I'm in is because my superpower is the ability to communicate, and it doesn't matter what it is. Like, I like to share. I think about what I think about. I like to share that. And I think ultimately it's a simple thing that you all have the ability to do. I just found it at a younger age. And I think it came with a little underlying confidence. Some might call it arrogance. I call it humble arrogance, right? Look, I know what I am. I know what I'm not. I know what I'm good at. I know what I have to overcome. And sometimes the things that you have to overcome, right, that's what makes you more than the things that you're good at, right? So I think it's all been a fun story. I don't know where it ends. Mm-hmm. But look, man, I get to be a part of college sports in a way that's awesome. I get to be around people that are so accomplished. And I'm not talking about broadcasting accomplishments. Like, we don't actually achieve anything, just so you know that, right? What we're doing, we don't achieve anything. We serve it, right? Like, we don't win the game. But the good thing is we don't lose either, right? So it's really not that bad. But we're not the story. We're getting to serve the story. It's one of the coolest things to be able to do. To be a part of the story, help tell the story, serve it really well, make it even better than it is. So I'm honored to be here. Like, it's great to be in front of people that want to do something like this. I didn't know I wanted to do this until it happened. I wish I was a little bit more prepared, sort of, right? But it's worked out.
It worked out. It worked out. For you to, that's a really good way to put your competitiveness, I imagine, helped you as a broadcaster.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, but more so in the sense that I needed to define what I was, right? So everybody wants everything, right? You see somebody, like, I go to a college campus and I see somebody riding those scooters and I'm like, I want one of those, right? You can't help it. It's human in us. It's human in us to want those things. I wanted to be a professional athlete until I became one and was like, I don't know if I really like this. I don't know if I want to keep going to Spain or Ireland or wherever the heck I was going to go, Lebanon, right? Just to play basketball. Yet at the same time, when I stopped, I didn't really know what else I wanted either, right? No longer an athlete. Who am I and what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I wouldn't say that maybe this is a bigger picture thought. By the way, roll with me. Patterns are happening and sometimes they go awry. But I was thinking about this kind of on the way in, and it's similar to what we're talking about. Like, people ask me a lot of times about, like, the plan. Like, how did I get to where I am? As if it's been a part of a plan. I would say I don't plan, but I'm always prepared, right? And I think we make that mistake a lot, particularly you all, if you think about your potential careers. What the business was 5 years ago is a lot different than what it is today. What it's going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, will be unrecognizable compared to what it is today. So don't overplan. Just be super prepared. And then you have to start thinking about, well, what does it mean to be prepared? Do I have good habits? Can I be held accountable, right? Do I honor responsibilities? Or do I just seek out the next opportunity? Like, plan, yeah, that's good, sort of, but the world's going to look a lot different by the time you get there. Or just be prepared. And the best teams, I always say, best teams don't win with set plays anymore. They win with adjustments, right? The same thing for you all, right? There is no set play because you don't know what play you have to run by the time you get there. But you can be prepared. I think that's kind of what separates me from a lot of other people. The plan is attached to someone else's reality. How many of you see some other broadcaster and say, that's it, I want to be that? Like, I do, like, right? I did. Right? It's okay, right? But the reality is, if that's what you're planning for, you're just planning to fail in that regard. What you want to do is prepare for whatever it's going to be and think about what that preparation looks like. Do you know yourself? Are you aware? Do you know how you think? Do you know what separates you from somebody else? Right? Because we all have unique skills. Sometimes you're just not aware of it yet.
Really well put. Really well put. And I hope you all take that word of advice.
If not, it's a seed and you'll get it later.
Yeah, it was a great advice. This is not a class, man. They're here because they want to be here.
Good.
College basketball fans. How many are college basketball fans? Big college basketball fan. Alan, you put your hand up first. You didn't waste any time. So I'm just going to let you know, Alan is blind. He's one of our blind broadcasters. He's going to be doing Delaware Blue Coats games.
Wow.
As a color analyst.
Wow.
How about that?
That is, look. Okay. All right. Humbled. That's the humbled part of my humbled arrogance right there.
Yeah. So, Alan, what's your question? What's your question for John?
So, obviously, with the whole NIL stuff going on, a couple of teams I wanted to ask you about. I'm a Michigan fan. We just got a new coach. They just got a new coach, Dusty May.
No, well.
And Indiana, of course, after beating Tennessee, in my opinion, looks like a pretty good team. Do you think out of Michigan, Indiana, and let's say Duke as well, how good do you think those teams could be, especially with Michigan and Indiana because of the Big Ten? Do you think Michigan could be a tournament team or no?
Great question, and there's no absolute answer to it, right? So when we talk about NIL, all we did was add variables on top of something that is filled with variables, right? Variables are anything from when you think about what you bring to the table every single day. You bring stresses, you bring your own realities. Then you try to bring a team together where you're paying different dues, and it gets really challenging. For Dusty, it's the best possible situation for him because the expectations aren't that high. The expectations are assemble a team and get them to play the way you want to play. Are they a tournament team? Probably not. You've got a Big Ten with 18 teams. It's going to be an absolute circus with travel. Schedules are going to be weird. I don't think they're an NCAA tournament team this year, but I also didn't think FAU was going to go to the Final Four. And I called that Sweet 16 Elite 8 at the Garden. Like, that was a shocker to me. And then I got to know Dusty really well because I did the American Athletic Conference tournament championship for the last 2-3 years. So I've gotten to know him very well. His expectations are pretty reasonable. Indiana, their expectations are never reasonable. And they live in absolute freaking dream world, thinking that it's still 1979, right? And they're 78, 79, whatever it is. And they're the best program under the sun. They have some of the best players, but they also have a fan base that has the highest expectations and a zero tolerance policy for anything less than a championship. Really hard to live up to expectations in the world today, especially when you put dollars on it. Who was the other one? You talk about Duke. Duke's another great example of, can you achieve at the level your fans expect you to achieve? And then can you define what they expect? I think that's the other big part of this that we forget, that college is still defined by the communities, right? It's not pro sports. Pro sports, you don't care. You like the players, right? You have a team that you like, but like ultimately, like that's a superstar. That's a superstar. You can get behind them. In college, it's still about the communities. And Duke has an expectation of elitism and greatness. Well, what is that? Well, is it an outcome? No, it's a process. It's how you defend. It's body language, right? The only guy that had bad body language for Duke was Coach K. And I've had this conversation with him. And he said, well, I was allowed to, and that was my job. The other guys didn't because of the culture of Duke. So the question is, can young guys being paid $1 million a year adhere to the culture of Duke that they don't even know exists? It's John Shire's biggest challenge. So I think of those three, Duke is probably the best. I think Indiana has the most potential, but you have old guys that are getting ready to move on, right? Umar Ballo comes from Arizona, great talent, getting a ton of money, never really knew how to win. Can he put it together for a year? Great challenge, even more challenging when you throw $1 million their way. Because, oh, by the way, who wouldn't like $1 million right now, right? I'm 43 and it would be going so fast, right? Like, if you just get handed something and you didn't really work, suffer a little bit, like healthily suffer, right? Like, I didn't just land at ESPN. Like, I worked in radio for free for a little while to figure out, like, oh, I can do this, right? Part of that process made me responsible for whatever reality I was going to experience later on. So much so that it wasn't opportunity for me to get, it was responsibility for me to serve, right? So can old guys figure that out when they're on their way out? Can young guys figure that out when they really only think they have a year? That's the greatest challenge. So in the end, with all that word salad, that some of it makes sense, Michigan may have the easiest run because their expectations are reasonable.
By the way, he's doing a Duke game. It's your first or second game?
Yeah, first and second. I got Carolina on the 15th, Duke on the 16th. So that'll be a fun little trip.
Oh, that's not bad. North Carolina, then Duke.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good way to start. All right, let's open up more questions. Go ahead.
Would you say this humble arrogance comes from the fact that you're from South Jersey?
A little bit. But also, like, my parents, when I was born, let's see, my mother and father were 23. They were both teachers, right? Like, we didn't know how much they struggled. Like, we still look back and go, like, oh, yeah, everything was good. Well, we had everything we wanted, but they served us, right? Like, my dad went back to school to become a superintendent and really progress in that career. My mother taught until 6 years ago, you know? I mean, they're not that old. They're 67 years old. They're not really old. But, like, for 40-some years, you served your family that way in a very humble, but somewhere in there's a conviction that you see. Like, my mother, as a music teacher, as a pianist, she was incredible, right? Did she boast about it? No. She didn't. In a way, she honored her gifts. She gave it to others, right? She put her hard work into serving us, creating opportunities for us. So I think a lot of it comes from having a normal childhood. When I say normal childhood, nothing was really handed, but at the same time, I was served well from my parents that like I didn't really want for anything. Part of it too is we weren't superficially great. We didn't walk on the scene and people like, these guys are the next big things. We had to achieve it first. So it's like the process of getting there, that's what we were. And that's what we still are. I'm still a part of the process that's getting me there. We're never really a finished product anyway. If you think you're a finished product, you got a rude awakening coming, man. Like that roller coaster is going to fall off and you're going to be in LA going, who am I and what do I do with the rest of my life, right? Like that was me as a professional athlete. So I think part of it comes from my upbringing. The other part of it comes from the failures. And the failures are only failures in the moment, right? Later on in life, you're going like, I'm defined by my failures. Maybe not defined by my failures, but defined by how I manage and handle my failures, right? So I think that's the blue collar mindset, right? That's the Eagles when we love them, right? They're not elite, but they play at that level. We love the Phillies when they're like that, right? Like the scraggly looking dudes this year, they just look like a bunch of hippies, but like, it's because they lost. Like, think about it. Like, what's his name? Braum or whatever. Baum, there you go. Look, or who's the dude that was pitching last? He came in, he was a reliever. Strom, that's the guy I'm thinking of. I mean, he looks like he's sitting at the bus stop somewhere and they're like, hey, why don't you get in the game and throw a few pitches? Like, but when you're winning, seriously, when you're winning, and you look like John Kruk and Lenny Dykstra, we love those dudes, right? So to me, it's like, it's part of the identity. It's this blue collar identity. And you've got to kind of bob and weave between the two. Cause like, I still put makeup on, right? For TV, I work in studio, it's high def. You're putting makeup on, sometimes a lot, right? So I'm not really totally blue collar, but I still cut my own grass. So somewhere in between.
Okay, very good.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Like, who do you think is gonna win March Madness this year? Like, for because I think Connecticut could win again.
They could. There's about 50 teams who could. Like so.
Like, who do you think is most likely to win?
So let's say Kansas most likely, but all we're doing is talking about the surface, right?
Yeah.
So like, if you're really going to answer that question and say, all right, John, you got to put money on a team. Who's it going to be? Well, for me to put my mortgage payment on a team, I have to consider every variable. And by the time I get through the fourth and fifth, I just go, you know what, I'm going to pay my mortgage instead, right? Because there are so many things to consider. And so they're kids. The external influences are now parents, family, AAU coaches, agents, maybe a shoe company who signed a deal with you. So you've got all these things weighing in on a kid. Then you have a coach who says, I can't coach everything because I have these guys for 1 year. I only have 2 players that even know who I am, right? Because they just got here and maybe they're here for a second year, but they're not really playing that much. So there's really no continuity or consistency within the group. The real question is like, who is a coach? And that's why like UConn's an interesting one because Danny Hurley is the common bond with those guys. Who is a coach can find common bond and common goal, put it in the middle of the room and bring everybody together based on that. Right? I gave a speech. This is funny. Sorry to go on tangents. This is what I do. I gave a speech. I was in LA and I was asked to speak at the Reagan Foundation. And they said, we want you to, I don't know if I ever told you this story, it's a terrible story, but we want you to introduce this keynote speaker. And they're like, just, get up and talk about sports. I'm like, man, I'm not going to talk about sports. Well, first off, I made fun of the fact that I was like, the only reason I was there is because they found a 30-year-old quasi-conservative, which I just refer to myself as a rationalist, like everybody's stupid, right? That type of thing. Like we all are, right? We're all emotional and all that. So I'm just kind of a rationalist. I said, you find a 30-year-old quasi-conservative in Los Angeles, I might as well be a unicorn. So they put me in there and said, just talk a little about sports, tell us about your experience. And I was like, you know what, I can't do that. It's not honorable. So what I wanted to do was talk about leadership, sports leadership, the things that I've learned in sports, like what makes someone a great leader. So I'm getting up there and I'm talking about my experiences and I played for a lot of good leaders, played for a lot of bad leaders. I said the best leaders I ever played for, and they may not even be the highest level coaches. My high school coach may have been one of the best leaders, right? He was nuts in his own way. But what he did was he put common bond and common goal in the middle of the room, and he brought everybody together. And we realized then that star, role player, manager, there was more than that made us the same than that which made us different. We all played for each other. How can you do that today? Like, Danny Hurley may be the guy. So when you say UConn, I'm with you. UConn might be one of those teams. Kansas, another one of those teams. Why? You got a great coach who in a way is bigger than the program. So those are the guys that have the edge on the surface, but man almighty, the things beneath all that, like it is really hard. You have to get a group of people connected. And here's the thing, like, we all disagree on everything, right? Like, we could watch the same movie and have a completely different perception of it, right? That's okay. Now what? How do I get us together? Those coaches, they're going to be more psychologists than they are anything else, because the people that can bring people together, different walks of life, different upbringings, different desires, those are the people that will succeed, particularly as coaches in today's day.
All right, go ahead.
So since you played college basketball at Penn State, UCLA, and now that you're in the broadcast booth, you kind of watched the game evolve over the years. And
Or devolve.
I just didn't say that. So outside of NIL, because that's the obvious one, from the time that you played to the time that you spent in the broadcast booth, what is the biggest shift or change you've seen in the game of college basketball?
It's been happening slowly. I mean, outside of the superficial stuff, like the money, right? The money, but also what comes with the money, which is entitlement, right? Like, let's just be clear about NIL. The players that are getting paid didn't create the market that they're getting paid in. And I didn't either. John Wooden did. Lou Alcindor did. Magic Johnson did. Larry Bird did, right? Those guys created the value in the sport today, right? It was the Houston Astrodome. They played, UCLA played Houston, right? Mm-hmm. UCLA plays Houston in the Houston Astrodome. It was the first nationally televised college basketball game during the regular season. And it was the first time shoe companies were like, oh, if I put my shoes on those guys, everyone's going to see it. Here we are today, right? Like, that's kind of like if you just took that point right there and then just jumped ahead and you go, I can see how we got here. Because shoes turn into other bits of apparel turn into other endorsements and market. You realize there's value in athletes. So the kids are getting that today. They didn't create that market. I would say the thing to me, when I just look at the overall game, is length, athleticism, and talent. Like, I get so sick of hearing this, and my brother and I share this thought. I get so tired, and I call coaches out on this. Anytime they say this, I can't help myself. It'd be disingenuous not to. Every time I hear it, it's like, oh, they're just so talented. I'm like, you're telling me there's a lack of talent out there. There's so much talent. The problem is you're too stuck looking at the surface, right? You're too stuck looking at the stars next to a guy's name. You're not watching tendencies, right? You're not seeing potential. But part of that not seeing potential is, if I train him, is he going to get paid and go someplace else? So we've kind of sacrificed consistency and growth because of the abundance of talent out there. So in a way, it's like we did this just to plateau for a little while. And I'm wondering what the next step is, and it's probably going to be contractual, right? We're going to have contracts for players to stay around. The more the talent that we have stays around, the length that we have stays around. Because let me tell you, when I walk out on a court and I'm just shoot around, I'm hanging out with guys, or we call the game on the sideline, I just look up and I'm like, how did I play? These guys are huge. And like, I covered guys who were 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", and played in the NBA, but like, there's something about it today when everyone on the floor is like that. The floor just gets shrunk. I needed the floor to be as big as possible to get shots off. And I see a floor just shrink because of the size of the guys and the amount of ground they can cover. That part's incredible. But talent and athleticism, it's just grown. And I feel like the last 5 to 10 years, with money really being what it is in the sport, it really has become something where people have specialized, and you see talent and skill. Now, what we don't have is feel. Like, I could still go out and, I don't want to say, I got to be careful. I don't want to, but my brother does it too with his Penn State guys. He'll get out there and he'll smoke them. How is that? Like, he's 45 years old. How is it he's smoking these 22-year-olds who are physically incredible? Feel, right? We can just play a different game because we see things happening before they happen. That's what's lacking right now, and that's also what separates high-level college guys to NBA guys. There's a reason why you have 12, 13-year NBA vets. They know how to play. They don't have to play as hard, right? So we have college guys that play super hard, but everybody does, right?
Jake Rosenberg, who was the Eagles executive, worked under Howie Roseman. He was a Pizza with the Pros guest last semester in the spring. And Jake left shortly after he joined us here for Pizza with the Pros. He's now a consultant working for universities, bringing the NFL model to universities for football. But they're going to do it in basketball as well.
They already are.
But he already has Oklahoma, Florida. He's got some big time schools. I don't want to let everything out of the bag what he's got, but he's got a lot of big schools that are reaching out to him because he knows how to put a salary cap together, how to control, because that's where college football is heading, and where college football is heading, basketball is right behind.
Yes.
And that's what's going to happen.
Why? Money, right? We had an ESPN symposium down in Charlotte where it was just college hoops, get everybody back together. And we had Charlie Baker, the new president of the NCAA there. He didn't really answer many questions. He's a politician. But the fact of the matter is the NCAA hired a politician. Why? Because they need legislative solutions to get to that contractual part of things, right? Trying to avoid the unionization of college athletes, that would be disastrous. But we want some sort of contracts to create some sort of baseline for growth, right? We have no baseline right now. We have no ceiling, no basement. Like, where do we go? It's just kind of this limbo. But that's one of the challenges. Are we a professional organization or are we not? Like, football controls hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. It might as well be a professional organization. The reality is it's been professional a long time. But when I was in college, business was done below the table, right? And it almost worked better that way. We all knew. When I was at UCLA, nobody was hurting. Like, if we rolled up to the City of Hope to do a fundraiser for cancer research, you would have thought the Lakers just rolled in. Like, but somehow things were better because business was done beneath the table. There was an expectation that was like, it's not okay. We're doing it, but it's not okay. There was an accountability built into it. I think the challenge is, like, until we have some rules, until we professionalize amateur sports, which sounds funny, but look, if someone's making billions of dollars in today's day, someone else is going to find out about it. And socially, that became an issue.
To your point earlier, 5 years down the road, you have no idea what it's going to look like. And this is changing by the day, the week, the month, the year. It's going to keep changing. Okay, right here.
We recently saw Tony Bennett retire, and do you think, like, the older coaches in the game, like Bill Self, Mark Few,
Jay Wright,
do you see them stepping away?
Yes.
Because of where the game is?
Yes, because you no longer control your own destiny. We always joked before in college sports, we would say, your job is dependent upon 18 to 22-year-olds. And, like, I'm sorry, I was one of them. I mean, I thought I was good, but I wasn't easy, right? Like, it's part of what made me good was I was arrogant. I had an ego, right? But I didn't know anything, right? So if you take that concept and then you apply the fact that there are players that are making more money than their coaches, and kids aren't making the decision based on what they feel when they go to a college campus. They make the decision based on the offer. What do you have to hold them accountable? And if they can transfer constantly, the threat of I'll just go someplace else makes it really hard to have sustainable success. And Tony Bennett retired for that particular reason. I've known him for 20 years, like since he was playing professionally, like 25 years. Gosh, I'm older than that. He has been the guy who said there's a certain way to do things. And if we do it that way, we may not win all the time, but we'll consistently win at a high level. He was able to do that. He can't do it anymore. Jay Wright's culture, right? You think of the Villanova way. And you go to watch a practice and you're like, these are simple, silly, fundamental things. But they drill it and it becomes part of who they are. Not anymore, right? Good luck getting a guy that may or may not stay when you have him do pivot foot chest pass drills. Like, it won't happen. So you're teaching less, right? Yet you're trying to maximize their potential in other ways. The problem is it's not consistent with who you are as a coach, and it's not consistent with what you know works when it comes to winning. So yeah, you're going to see a lot of coaches do that. Now, Mark Few's an interesting one. They have their own brand. They just have their own brand. Like, they're so insulated where they are. Like, literally, like they're just insulated. Now they are going to the Pac-12, which whatever that is anymore. Like, so they're in a way protected where they have their own brand. They don't have football. That's a big piece of it too. Where basketball is the story. They can always offer a good amount of money, if not the most money. So that's a big piece of them. You look at Coach K. Coach K, 3 or 4 years before he retired, he said, I can only teach about 50% of what I used to teach. And coaches don't coach, they teach, right? If you can't teach, you can't coach, right? Like, and I say teach, I mean, teaching is the specific skill, but it's also what gets you motivated to learn that specific skill, right? So you're teaching people to learn how to learn so they can play the way you need them to play. Like, there is manipulation, psychology, and then, oh, by the way, a little basketball in there. Like, how can you, and when I say manipulate, right, we think manipulate's a bad word. It's not, right? I'm a good manipulator. I manipulate people to help get out of their own way so we can do something that's mutually beneficial. Doesn't sound as bad, right? Like, sometimes our own motivations get in the way. So the best coaches were the ones that like massage that person, that got into them psychologically to understand what motivates them and then kind of unifies their motivations with the team. And then you see that product, which is like Final 14, right? No guarantees you're going to win a championship, but Final 14. So there are some guys that can still do it, but for the most part, the old coaches, if I can't teach what I used to teach, I can't control the outcome the way I used to control the outcome. And that doesn't mean we win a national championship, but it means throughout the course of the year, we do things consistently enough that we always put ourselves in the best possible situation to win. Can't guarantee wins, put yourself in the best possible situation. It's like planning or preparing. Like, you prepare.
Very good. Oh, let's go in the back. Connor.
Did you ever consider coaching like your brother Joe?
Not with my brother Joe. Yes. I've been offered a few jobs. First off, like, I know how hard they work, and part of what I like is balance. Like, you have to be, it almost has to be something you have to do as a coach. Like, and this is me, so I'm an analyst, and I go to practices, and you're constantly assessing the team. I watch coaches more than anything else. I ask them real questions. So like when I'm at Indiana and Tom Crean was at Indiana, I'm like, Coach, how are you? Like, how's your family? Like, your son gets booed every time he steps up to the plate at his own high school because he's your son. Like, how are you? Sometimes how they answer that question tells me enough about the profession that I don't want it, right? Like, if I can't control that part of it, like say I have no balance, I don't want to give all my competitiveness to it. You have to do it. My brother, he was made to coach. He was made to be a leader. He has a conviction that is almost problematic, right? I know this, I grew up with him. But at the same time, I wouldn't take an inch of that away because it makes him who he is today. The question is, by the time he gets there, right? By the time he's a head coach, because there's a second part to this answer that probably is a shorter answer. By the time he gets to be a head coach, like, are you really able to enjoy it anymore? Because along the way, you're paying dudes who stink half the time, right? You have to tell people things that you really don't believe because you need a roster, right? So do you even like what you're doing anymore? Or are you just, have you accepted I'm a pro coach, right? I'm basically coaching a European team that one year they look like this, the next year they're completely different. I went to Spain, played for 3.5 months. We all got fired, right? And then they brought a whole new team and a whole new coaching staff in for the rest of the season, and then brought a whole new team. Like, that's the way it goes, right? It's just, I also, once I stopped playing, got into broadcasting, had a few offers to do it, I realized I wasn't willing to do what I had to do to be able to do what I wanted to do, right? And that's another one. I've said it before. I think I said it in your broadcast, Kim. In your positions, whatever they're going to be, you have to be willing to do whatever you have to do to be able to do what you want to do, right? For me, when I got into broadcasting, it was like, I need to do other things because I'm not working enough, right? I did workouts. I was a consultant for college teams where I'd come in and just kind of assess players, and sometimes it was like, where is he at mentally? What's the issue? Help these guys, help bring them together. I did it for prep schools, and it was fun for a while. I ended up getting into the brokerage. I was a commercial real estate broker until I really kind of went full-time in broadcasting, but I wasn't willing to do all the things along the way. Now, my brother was lucky, played 12, 13 years professionally, came here for Rowan for like 2 years as an assistant, and then he was a head coach. It was perfect for him. I'm not really ready to dedicate my life to that. I do a lot of other things, right? I had a trade school. We put out electricians and HVAC service techs, like serving people, right? I'm diversifying, right? But I like the balance of sports so much so that I enjoy it, and then I leave it for a while and leave all the stress and headaches of it. Like I don't in the off season. It's not my life, right? People ask me a lot of times, who's going to win this year? Who's going to do that? How did you see this guy win there? I go, nope. Like they think I'm crazy because I do this at a pretty high level, but I can't dedicate my life to the chaos of it nonstop. And I thank God for that clarity, because it is 100% what you do, but also has to be who you are. Like I'm not ready to dedicate my identity to it. You know?
Good.
So this is kind of like a broad question, but how would you go about like fixing their lack of regulations right now around?
It's broadly specific. That's what that is, right? Right. Like there's a specific answer to the broad question. So you're really touching on something. First off, strength. The NCAA had an issue where they lacked identity, and they were also weak. They got put back on their heels because of social pressure, and nobody had the guts, frankly, to stand up and say, yo, stop trying to say that these guys are taken advantage of. Do you want us to put an actual dollar amount value on what they're getting? Well, what are they getting? First class travel. We charter. Like when I was at Penn State, we flew the Charlotte Hornets plane, the Wizards plane, the Celtics plane. We'd go to State College Airport, and there's the Celtics plane sitting there for us, with a poker table in the back, couches everywhere. Like we live like kings. Our locker room and training room, second to none. And I know this. Why? Because I went and played over in Spain at a pretty high level, and it stunk. We took buses everywhere, right? Like we're pro athletes. Some guys were making $1 million on that team. Like, and we took buses everywhere. Sometimes it was multiple vans, right? And sometimes the showers didn't work, and we're driving an hour and a half back to Lyon, like in a van. Like we were pro athletes then. And I'm sitting there going, wait a second, UCLA and Penn State, it wasn't like that. Also, we had academic support. Also, we had the best healthcare under the sun. We never paid for food, right? Like, how do you put a dollar amount on those things? Because we've abandoned the education point of it. And that's, when I say it's fine, duly noted, accepted. When I was in school, I was there to play basketball. I got my degree, but I was an athlete. Like, that was my purpose. I accept the purpose that these guys have. I really do, because I understand that perspective. But we also need adults to be strong. And we need adults to stand up and say, hey, look, college has a lot to offer. Here's monetarily what we think the value is. And we are applying a scholarship to that too. It's worth about $500,000 a year. In addition to that, you're learning how to be a pro. You're not a pro yet. Like, if I was the president of the NCAA, I would have stood up and said, you all think you're pros. You have no idea what it means to be a pro, right? And the problem is there's a lot of pros out there who have made a lot of money who have none left anymore because they didn't know how to be a pro. And being a pro is far more about, like, playing the game. It's more about managing your brand, being an adult, being responsible with the gifts that you've been given. Like, that's what the true pros do. Kobe was one of the best pros, right? I got to know Kobe really well. Kobe was a pro's pro. He worked his tail off as if he was the worst player on the floor. His fear was not a failure. His fear was not succeeding, right? There was something about him that drove him. But also when he retired, how many saw Kobe after he retired? He was always smiling. He sat courtside and watched games. Can you picture LeBron doing that? No, and this isn't a LeBron-Kobe conversation. But there's a security that comes from someone like that is motivating. And we never leaned on those guys. We never got the influence from Coach K. We never got the influence from Kobe. We never got the influence we got the influence of the loudmouths who didn't like that poor players were getting taken advantage of. Were they? Yes. So again, you're not wrong. Doesn't mean you're right, right? If you can't deal with the nuance in between, which means you got to be strong and you got to like climb into the swamp and say, all right, look, we're in the swamp. This nuanced swamp. Let's deal with reality. It's not here and it's not there. It's somewhere in between. You're getting a ton of value. You're developing good habits. You're learning how to solve problems. Well, what are the problems that you solve? And again, you're asking me this question. I'm giving you the answer as if I'm the president of the NCAA and I'm talking to real people. And I'm saying, you learn how to solve problems. The problems are not just how do I score 20 points a game. The problems are how do I manage my life? How do I learn how to be a pro? How do I handle accountability in the sense where I have to do something that I don't want to do? It's the greatest life lesson you'll ever learn. Do something that you don't want to do, right? And give it whatever you've got to give it. It may not even be 100%, but give it what you've got to give it, right? Learn how to know what you need to know type of thing. Like, means you don't know everything, but you figured out what you need to do to be good at something. You learn that, your professional career becomes sustainable. If you don't, it's a crapshoot. So I would say, we're the NCAA, we still care about education. But in addition to education, we care about the things that you don't see. Accountability, good habits, teaching you how to be a professional in life. So that whatever it is you do, you'll have the skills to be able to solve the problems that come your way. Because, oh, by the way, the statistic's real. What is it, like 99% of college athletes don't go pro in their sports? We say that, it sounds cheesy in a commercial, but it's also reality. There's more people like me that didn't have a long professional career and made just enough money to feel good about it for a while, right? To maybe delay that next step a little bit further. So I would say we need to first define what's special about college. And if you're listening to people that never went, then you're an idiot, right? And I've said that to a lot of the people at the NCAA. You brought in people to have an influence on college sports that are so far removed from it, that have made hundreds of millions of dollars. We had 3 people, Condoleezza Rice, Grant Hill, and David Robinson, made the decisions that we're now living with. What do they have to do with freaking college sports? They were a Band-Aid, and they put a bigger Band-Aid on a giant gaping wound and refused to do surgery underneath the surface, which means the second that Band-Aid comes off, blood's flowing again. And so I would say weakness. It's typical weakness. Everyone's scared. Everyone wants to keep their job, right? So they're weak. I would love it if someone was strong enough to stand up and say, hate me all you want, right? I'm still going to be honest. I have conviction behind this belief. And 10 years from now, you'll thank me, right? Hate me for 10, but judge me then.
All right, let's go right here.
So earlier on, you talked about expectations, and I was wondering what you thought about like college players like Cooper Flagg at Duke, who are younger than I am.
Yeah.
How do you think he's going to perform at such a high level at a young age?
So it's like there's going to be moments where he's incredible, and it's how does he handle the moments where it's hard, right? So first time around, like college, one of the things about college is it's incredibly well scouted. You know, pro sports are scouted, but what they scout is tendencies, right? They're less sets, and you want to learn the tendencies because those players have feel. Or even in the NFL, there are tendencies based on a coverage. Hey, when we're in this coverage, this guy likes to run this route, right? That's how they study. In the NBA, hey, in this situation, they try to get the switch. If they get the switch, this is what he tends to want to do, right? If he gets a switch on a guard, this is what he wants to do. If he gets a switch on a big, this is what he wants to do. Here's how we're going to cover it, right? Those are like tendencies that you get feel from. College is far more scouted from a structural standpoint, which means a younger player is going to work for a little while, and then teams are going to adjust to them. Does he know how to adjust to the adjustment? Right? It's constant. It's like it's the infinity, right? It's cyclical in a way. Like, figured it out. Oh, they adjusted to me. What do I got to do again? I got to figure it out again. Like, it's just perpetual. So the question is he humble enough that when it doesn't work, that he goes, I need to figure out? Or is he going to look around and go, these dudes, they don't know what they're doing? Because Duke's had a few of those. Jalen Johnson a couple years ago. Like, incredible player. The second teams adjusted to him, checked out. Sore ankle, he had a shin problem. Like, it was someone else's fault. I think he's got it, though, because he's 6'10" and shoots it, and he also did it against the Team USA, which was. But John Shire gets it too. John Shire also leans a lot on Coach K. Coach K's got a really good perspective on those guys. Like,
all right, you already got one, Leo. Oh, great. Go ahead.
I want to know your opinion about Providence, the university. When it comes to Kim English, she's taken over for essentially one of the longest tenured coaches at the time at Foley.
Yep.
I want to know your opinion on how he's going to do going into year 2, considering the fact that one of his top players just went to the NBA.
Yep. The good thing is they're in the Big East. The Big East is a basketball conference. It's also diverse in the sense that, like, the Big Ten, up until probably this past year with UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington coming in, the Big Ten was like the Big Ten, right? It's going to be a knock them down, drag them out kind of game. The Big East, you just create your own identity and figure out how to play. they'll be competitive. I don't think they're going to be great. I don't think the Big East is going to be top heavy like it's been in recent years. Creighton's good. Like there's some teams out there that'll be pretty impressive, but beyond that, it's pretty wide open. So if you finish 5th, 6th in the league, you're probably an NCAA tournament team. Could they finish 5th, 6th in the league? Yeah, but they're going to have to win with less. And that's going to be the challenge for Kim English. Like a lot of these guys do really well when they have 1 or 2 stars and they kind of get everybody else to fall in line. What happens when you have 5, 6, 7, 8 guys that can play? Can you win with less until you get more? That'll be the biggest challenge. But it's in the Big East in the sense where not everybody's the same. The game's different from day to day. I think the Big East actually makes you a better basketball team in the end because it's got a unique identity. It really does.
All right. Go ahead, Noah.
First of all, how was Joe and his family?
Yeah.
Because I missed them at the games.
Yeah.
And my real question is, how was growing up with him as a brother and a teammate?
Cool. First off, he's great. I was just up there last weekend, up at Penn State.
How's Elijah?
Well, Elijah's living here. Elijah's here. He's here with my parents. He's still going to Pittman.
Okay.
Loves being here.
Good.
But Penn State's funny because, like, when we were at Penn State, so Penn State, like Pittman, wasn't very good basketball. Like, they had a couple years where they're pretty good. When Joe went there, my dad actually asked me, he goes, "You sure you want to go to Penn State?" He goes, "You think you're ever going to play?" And it was like, we really didn't think Joe was that good. They thought I was good, but that's because I had a 40-inch vert and ran a 4.45 40. Like, I was an athlete, right? So again, the surface fooled you. I was like fool's gold. I could shoot, don't get me wrong, but there's some YouTube out there. I could play. But Joe is a great basketball player. Like, floor game, all of it. Like, mindset, like he was incredible. Played with the Lakers and the Suns, for crying out loud. Like, he was incredible. Led the Big Ten in scoring. Like, you think I'm short. My brother's even shorter. Like, he looks like a choir boy and give you 40, right? Like, he was, he's doing really well now, but he's like the golden boy up at Penn State. They loved both of us until I transferred. Like, I got death threats and he was welcome back. Like, they like me now because I say nice things about him on TV, and truth be told, like, I love the place. It was second home. I appreciate it 10 times more because I left it and went to LA, right? Penn State, community, family, all that stuff. UCLA, business. Like, I learned that really quickly. So he's loving it. He's also empowered to be him there. That was the biggest key. When he told me Mike Rhodes offered him a job, I'm like, Mike Rhodes averaged 62 points a game for the last 3 years in a row. I said, and don't get me wrong, I like Mike. Like, I've covered a lot of VCU in my last few years. Like, I knew Mike well. I like Mike. He's a Lebanon Valley guy. Like, he fits the mold there. But he's got to be willing to give up control for you guys to score. And he said all the right things. And in the first season, I saw it was true. He let Joe go. They shot more threes. They made more threes than they ever had in the history of the program. They scored more points in the Big Ten than they had in the history of the program. Like, they were different. And Mike's doing a great job. The best coaches empower their assistants to maximize their potential. Mike's done that. And in a way, he's probably setting Joe up to be the next head coach, whether he knows it or not. I know my brother well enough. That's what's happening, right? Growing up with him, he was the best and the worst, right? Like, we were 18 months apart and incredibly competitive at everything. And that didn't stop at basketball, right? Like, we're going to be into the same people whether you want us to or not. Why? It was something we could fight over, right? Like, it's just what it was. It helped us that I was a football player and baseball player too. It was like, John wasn't just basketball. Like, I did other things that sort of helped. But we were competitive. And I always say, like, who was your best? People always ask, who's your best teammate growing up? And I'm like, it was my brother. Because how do you define your best teammate? Who brought the best out of me, right? And sometimes to bring the best out of someone, you also bring out the worst. But in doing so, you expose the worst. At some point, that's my problem. I got to deal with that. We did that for one another, right? We challenged each other in every way, right? Socially, spiritually, whatever. Put it all together. We challenged each other in every possible way. We were also perfectly different, right? My parents wouldn't have said that 25, 30 years ago. But we're perfectly different in the sense that my skills exposed his vulnerabilities. My abilities, I should say, exposed his vulnerabilities. His skill exposed mine. So what happens? Figure out how to beat one another. and then you maximize the potential of both. And we realized, like with me, I could have gone other places in college. Because of the success he had, I was recruited at a level he never was. He was a freshman and sophomore starting at Penn State. I go score 35 points a game in high school, win another state championship, I can go anywhere under the sun, right? He brought that for me because of his success. Did I know it at the time? Somewhere in there. Did I admit it? No, right? But that somewhere along the line, I realized we were at our best individually when we were together. And to this day, it's probably not changed. You know, I bought a house right behind him. I bought a house 2 blocks from where I grew up. My parents were still there.
I did know that, yeah.
And his house was, our backyard's backed up. I mean, we still fought. To this day, we argue.
But he sold that house.
Yeah, he screwed me over big time. So my neighbor put up a big white fence. I'm like, I had this whole area, the trees grew over. We had a big gate that went into his yard. And there was a big white fence there. And now my landscaping needs to be redone.
All right.
Thanks, Joe.
There you go. All right. Go ahead, Aiden.
What's it kind of been like, the same question before, your brother essentially have an interview and be a little bit more professional, I'm sure. What's that kind of like?
Define professional. I would say I'm professionally unprofessional. And I speak in contradictory terms because that explains the nuance in everything we do, right? Like, humbly arrogant, right? Know what I am, and I also know what I'm not, right? Accept both of them. It means I don't shy away from it. So I think it's grounding more so than anything else, but it also gives you the perspective. Because I care for him in a different way, like I have a coach's perspective through him. I have great relationships with coaches, and I respect what they do, and I try my best to understand it. But you get to a certain point that you're like, I didn't go through their same path, nor did I witness Roy Williams for $5,000 a year taking Dean Smith tapes all over the state of North Carolina. Had I witnessed that, I probably have a different perspective on Roy Williams and a different perception of everything he does, right? Because I saw Joe do it all through his professional career, I saw him write a book. I actually helped him. Like, now by helping, I read and said, this is dumb, do this, say this. Like, I saw him write a book as a player while he was playing professionally overseas. And the whole idea was he was going to write this book called Offense Wins. Surprise, surprise, right? That's what we're going to do. He always said at Rowan it was going to be red, brown, gold, and neon green. Let it fly. I was like, okay, I like it. But then he said, I guess I got to save that for Penn State. I was like, okay, good. That's even better. Blue, white, and neon green. But I saw this process, and he said, I want to write this book from a player's perspective. Because when I become a coach, I want to adhere to this. Right? There's a book, John Wood, Swen Nader wrote this book, the John Wooden book. It's called You Haven't Taught Until They've Learned. Right? Sounds cute, but then you stop and you're like, oh, yeah, like, that's a good point. That's great. You're a great teacher. Your whole class got D's. Like, you're real charismatic, but they learn nothing, right? Like, Joe wanted the perspective of players so that as a coach, he can speak to that perception. Right? I always say, like, people ask me all the time, why don't you tweet? Why aren't you on Twitter? You have strong opinions. I'm like, I don't. I have calculated perspective, right? Like, I actually think about things. I don't just tell you how I feel. I can't control the perception of people on Twitter. So whatever I say, I don't know what they're bringing to the table. I have no idea how they're going to perceive what I'm saying. So what I'm saying might come across as something completely different based on what they're bringing to the table. My brother wanted to be able to speak to that perception of a player. This is what they stand on. This is what players think. This is what they desire, right? So instead of, in a way, stifling that and suppressing that, he said, no. I'm going to speak to that. I'm not going to break them down to build them back up my way. I would rather take an arrogant, loose cannon and figure out how to maximize their potential than find someone without a pulse and teach them how to be a robot. That's not fun. I appreciated that on a level that I couldn't comprehend at the time. So as he went through the coaching ranks, I held him accountable to it. Like, I actually read the book twice, right? And we think the same, so it's like, I think I wrote half of it, you know what I mean? Just like when I say things on TV, I'll get a text like, dude, that's mine. Like I've been saying that for 5 years. What are you talking about? So I really appreciated that part of him, where it's like, in that sense, there's a conviction saying, like, I don't need to change who they are, right? So I've actually gotten a lot more from him he gets a lot from me, but I think it's more so because of the relationships I have in the industry, right? When you're respected, it's far more important than if you're liked. And like, there are guys at my network that have millions of followers, yet coaches won't talk to them because they don't trust them. What's the point? You got a lot of idiot friends. Congratulations, right? You got a lot of people that'll like your tweet. Congratulations. Like, the coach won't let you come to shoot around. You're terrible at your job. Like, that's how I feel, right? If you can't serve the bigger picture of things, then you're not doing your job well. So Joe has helped me with that. And in a way, my service to the game, because that's what I do. I feel honored to be able to do what we get to do. Like, I'm lucky to go to Houston and talk to Kelvin Sampson, right? And just watch him and talk to his team every now and then hype them up on TV, like, because they deserve it, right? I love their program. Like, I love what they stand for. I do think, like, we've supported one another in our own past, and it's probably better that we're not doing the same thing. We actually did a podcast for a little while called Coach and the Commentator. People were like, dude, why don't you post it out? I'm like, if 5 people watch it, cool. It's just Joe and I talking, right? And we may do it again. People have asked for it. But, like, we have a unique perspective because we have our own world. If I tried to function in his world, it would just be like 13-year-old versus 15-year-old John and Joe, right? So we do maximize each other better today. And maybe we'll see that clear 50 years from now. Lord willing.
All right, let's go. One last question. Go ahead, Hannah. You get the last one.
Man, that's a great question that nobody wants to answer because no one's truthful. It's changing the game most importantly, and it's not, when I say the game, it's better to consider them separate, right? I work with a lot of the WNBA analysts, NCAA college, women's college basketball analysts. Rebecca Lobo will tell you the biggest problem is we compare the two games, right? The WNBA is different. NCAA college basketball, totally different from women's and men's. It's a different game, and that's okay. On its own, it's great. When you compare the two, it becomes a problem, right? The other part is the WNBA has been something that really helped take off women's college basketball, but also girls AAU basketball. Why is that? There's a professional outlet. The professional outlet used to be go overseas, and it still is to a degree because the amount of money over there. The problem is you're comparing the two all the time. And our stupid shows like Get Up, First Take, and all that stuff where it's just opinions, people are just saying things, none of which is factual or true. It's just emotion. I'm going to yell at you and someone's going to yell back. There's no truth in it because there's no perspective and there's no nuance. The reality is the WNBA started, 30, 40 years after the NBA? They're that far behind. Yet because we compare the two, they're supposed to be equal. They're not. The WNBA loses money. It loses money because it's new and has to be subsidized. And it's trying too hard to function in NBA arenas prior to it growing to the point where it has, this year in particular. Caitlin Clark's been great for the WNBA. Like, even from a negative standpoint, what people don't understand is it's no different than boys and men playing basketball. It's no different, yet it's completely different at the same time. And at some point, someone needs to come in and figure out how to just separate it and say, this is what the WNBA is on its own. And you start to see the real talent. We're starting to see that in college basketball, where like Dawn Staley has taken that on and she's like, no, we're good. Like, come watch us. We're going to go play in Paris. They're doing that for a second year in a row. People are watching. It's good. There's too much drama around it right now, and we're guilty of that. And in doing so, we're not honoring the game. There's a lot of hate, too. Here's the other part no one wants to talk about, right? There's so much hate towards the women in the WNBA. There is legitimate hate. We had this conversation with Charlie Baker. And I'm sitting there going, like, it's human. The hate is entirely human. When you compare the two, women's and men's, people are going to view you as a threat when you encroach in their world, right? So that's what you're getting. But to a degree, to me, and nobody wants to deal with this reality, it's validation in a way. So while there's a crazy amount of hate, it's simultaneously validation for the growth that it's seen. And the question is it sustainable? That's going to be the biggest challenge. The longer they try to make it equal to the NBA, the harder it's going to be to sustain, right? The more you can kind of branch off and say, we're going to operate on our own, you'll be able to grow it and control your own destiny. I think that's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge, but it doesn't take anything away from the quality of basketball and the potential, because now you have young girls at 5, 6, 7, 8 years of age wanting to play in the WNBA. That was not the case 20 years from now. So it's there.
Let's thank John Crispin for being with us here tonight. Next week we have Anthony Figazzato. Anthony is the coordinator of marketing events for the Phillies. Anyone here worked with Anthony this year? Anyone did?
Can anybody else say his name again?
Figazzato.
That's good.
There you go. So Anthony will be here talking about, he is a guy that hires interns for promotion. So
Better be able to
and
pronounce his
marketing
name.
and events. So that'll be next Monday. Thank you again, John, for
Thank
being
you.
here. We'll see
Thank
you
you.
guys next week. Thank you.